In 2023, winning an FNCS major in Europe meant two things: $100,000 per player and a ticket to the FNCS Global Championship. But one FNCS winner was denied both. His $100,000? Gone. His entry to the Global Championships? Denied. But that wasn't all. 1 year later, his teammate was banned from entering the 2024 Global Championship. Somehow, after the loss of life-changing money and opportunities, he found a way back. This is the story of how Fortnite's unluckiest player became a world champion. It's 2022 and a player named Swizzy is starting to make a name for himself on the Asia region. He's Russian, but unlike most Russian players who play the European servers, he is located in the east of Russia, so plays in Asia. Since he's pretty far away from Japan, his connection isn't great. It's around 40 ping, but that's enough for him to showcase his skills. Despite earning in the first week of the Solo World Cup qualifiers in 2019, it takes him over 2 years of progressing his skills to earn again, this time in a trio cash cup where he places first with new teammates Zotax and Shimoki, his first tournament win. The winning formula is simple: send height every game and give Swizzy the mythic assault rifle. They win this tournament and keep this game plan going into the FNCS Grand Finals. In 6 out of the 12 games, they're able to take height, and Swizzy wins his first FNCS Championship title in the region of Asia. With the success Swizzy is having in the Asia region, he decides to move to Europe 1 year later. Asia is the 4th smallest region and generally much less competitive, so by moving to the largest region, he opens himself up to much larger prize pool tournaments. Many pros who dominate the smaller regions have attempted this before, but pretty much all fail. Just because you can do well in a small region doesn't mean that you can hang with the best of the best in Europe. But for Swizzy, this was not a problem. In his first 3 months in Europe, he earns $12,300, almost a third of his lifetime earnings up until that point. He is dominating the solo cash cups, winning 5 solo victory games in a row and setting an at the time world record. No small region player has moved to Europe and shown this much potential before. With his teammate Shimoki, who also moved from Asia, they placed 9th in their first FNCS Grand Finals in EU. This could have been a much higher placement, as at the end of day 1 they were in 2nd place with a shot at winning the event, but unfortunately a team contested their drop spot on day 2 and they dropped down to 9th. But Swizzy gets put in an unfortunate scenario the next season. He and Shimoki aren't able to repeat that success and place 26th in the Chapter 4 Season 2 FNCS Finals. Despite moving regions with Shimoki, Swizzy decides to drop him and play with someone else. A difficult decision, but one he would not regret. Swizzy picks up Potrik, another Russian player who's done well in FNCS but has never top 5'd. Not many people had predicted this duo to place well, but Swizzy's performance here cannot be understated enough. Across all players in this lobby, he had the most damage, most eliminations, best damage ratio, and the most damage dealt in zones 4 to 8 and 9 to 12. The servers this season were truly atrocious, but coming from a higher ping background, this is something that Swizzy is used to. In fact, he and Potrik used it to their advantage. They landed at the Eastern Watchtower and were able to grab the mythic flapjack rifle from the vault here. By combining this with the heisted breacher shotgun obtained from the holo chests in the same area, the amount of output that they had to the endgame was truly unmatched, because they could just destroy and spray through pretty much every single build in the laggy lobby. Not to be disrespectful to Potrik, but by comparing his stats to Swizzy's, it's clear who the star on the team was. Winning this FNCS netted them $100,000 and a ticket to the FNCS Global Championship. Or so they thought. Due to the Russia-Ukraine war that started earlier that year, global restrictions and sanctions were put on Russia. For Fortnite players, this meant that Russia was added to the prize-restricted regions in the rulebook. This states that you are not eligible for, nor entitled to, win any prizes in connection with the event. Many Russian professional players worked around this by moving out of the country. Malabuka had managed to successfully claim his earnings from the FNCS since he had moved to Serbia. Swizzy thought he had also done all of the correct steps since he moved to Belarus, but his $100,000 earnings? Gone. His first place on the leaderboard? Removed. His and Potrik's invitation to the FNCS Global Championship? Deleted. Despite moving out of Russia to compete, he still had bank accounts registered to Russia, and due to these sanctions, Epic Games were legally unable to pay him, which triggered his disqualification. The reason other Russian players like Malabuka were able to claim their earnings and get invited to the Global Championship is because they had set up new bank accounts outside of Russia and could get paid. And his bad luck doesn't just end there. The next FNCS at the start of 2024, Swizzy and Putrik would dud, placing 21st. When playing with Putrik, Swizzy was mainly the IGL. He'd make the calls and generally lead, but with his insane fighting skills and massive damage output, this is no position for him to be in. He should be focusing on getting eliminations and supporting his IGL. With Swizzy showing clear talent, there were a lot more players interested in playing with him, specifically Vanya, who had also just had a poor season, placing 25th. Vanya is a traditional IGL, but he also has some great fighting skills, so teaming him with Swizzy would allow Swizzy to focus much more on fragging. I asked Swizzy last year why they decided to play together. He simply said, Vanyak GOAT. So unsurprisingly, when they started to play together in 2024, they had immediate success by combining two of the region's most underrated talents. One of the main seasonal items in Chapter 4 Season 2 was the Wings of Icarus. They had been removed for most of the season due to a bug where players were able to fly up to sky limit with them. However, when they were reintroduced, they were silently buffed. There were no tweets about this on the timeline, no patch notes from Epic Games, and not even any of the leakers or data miners had even noticed. But one team had noticed the buffs, and that was Swizzy and Vanya. Before the patch, it was very easy to take fall damage if you swapped to a weapon. Even worse, whilst using them, the wings had their own hitbox, making it insanely easy for you to die out of the sky. So because of this, most pro players thought this item was utterly useless. However, after the stealth buff of the item, the fall damage was removed. This means that you can fly up into the air and cancel the animation, propelling you forward if done under a ramp, or vertically if done against a wall. Since you were cancelling the animation, the wings no longer had that large hitbox, so you would no longer take fall damage, and that large hitbox was no longer there. This turned an item that everyone once thought was useless into one that absolutely defined the meta. Swizzy and Vanya were one of the very few teams who would even notice this buff, and since there were barely any other usable mobility items in the season, this gave them a huge lead and advantage. Swizzy and Vanya crafted a game plan that was entirely focused around using an item that everyone else thought was utterly useless, and with this strategy, they won the FNCS Major in Europe, making this now Swizzy's third time winning an FNCS championship. More importantly, he was able to set up a bank account and actually receive the earnings from this win. But with the Fortnite LAN events returning every single year, pros' main goals are no longer to win an FNCS Major on the region. Instead, it's to win a global championship, and of course, Swizzy was denied entry to this the year prior. So coming into the 2024 Global Championship, Swizzy and Vanya were top picks to do well after their impressive year. But again, bad luck would strike. Swizzy was able to get his travel visa to go to the United States to compete where the event was being held. However, this year his teammate Vanya had his request denied. He attempted twice to get his visa in Serbia, and then twice more in Poland, and all 4 requests were denied. Vanya could not get into the United States, which meant that Swizzy was left with no duo and had to choose one of the backup players. His choice was Polish player Yapko. Up until this point, Yapko's best placement in an FNCS was 16th, so at the time, this was a bit of a downgrade from Vanya, who he'd won FNCS with and then placed 3rd. The original plan with Vanya was to land at the Raft and then play for the Mythic and the Medallion. However, with Yapko, they landed on the opposite side, grabbed enough loot, and then left. This lifted Peterbot and Poyo to get the Medallion and the Mythic 12 out of 12 games, and is probably one of competitive Fortnite's big what-ifs. What if Vanya had gotten his visa? Would they have contested and fought Peterbot and Poyo, potentially leading to someone else winning the tournament? Or would they have just played the same game plan and potentially performed better? Swizzy and Yapko had an impressive top 10 finish, but many people wondered what could have been if he'd actually been able to play with Vanya. For 2 years in a row, Swizzy had an incredible year online, and then due to circumstances out of his own control, he hasn't been able to compete to his fullest at the biggest LAN stage. He was stripped of his $100,000, denied access to globals in 2023, and then wasn't able to play with his teammate in 2024. But this was all about to change going into 2025. With the main game mode switching from duos to trios, Swizzy originally wanted to play with Vanya and one more. The two had worked as a duo, so naturally sticking together for trios just makes sense. They picked up Mustache and they were able to win the first trio cash cup, dropping 2 20 elimination games and 2 more double-digit elimination games on top of that, but something just wasn't clicking. Their fighting capabilities seemed unmatched, but their tournament results after this just weren't really up to scratch. So when the world's best IGL Queasy started looking for a team, it only made sense to switch up. And since Vanya was the IGL previously, Swizzy decided to stop playing with him despite their insane success as a duo. Swizzy was now locked in with Queasy and Mustache, and Vanya started to play with Pixie and Marius. Looking at results across the year of 2025, it would seem that Vanya got the better end of the deal. 3rd, 1st and 3rd in the 3 online FNCS majors in Europe. In comparison, Swizzy's team placed 4th, 5th and then 7th. Despite this, coming into the FNCS Global Championship, the vast majority of people predicted Swizzy's team to win it all. Coming into an event like this, picking a drop spot is arguably the most important decision a professional team can make across the whole tournament. And Queasy, Swizzy and Mustache decide to land at the Hive. When you look at this drop spot, most people think the main selling point here is the Queen. By eliminating her, you get the mythic Wrecker Revolver, the Surge Medallion, and 3 legendary slurps. This loot plays a big part in their strategy, but arguably this is the least important part of this drop. The meta for the entire year has been trading damage back with other teams, healing and then repeating in order to rack up Storm Surge damage. And the Hive couldn't be set up any better for this. On top of the 45 chests, there are 5 Hive stashes, which have a 100% chance of dropping a heal and a 50% chance of dropping 2. There's 4 Swarmer nests, and these have a 100% chance of dropping more heals. And then there are Bug Bombers, who have a 100% chance of dropping heals. So to trade surge damage, this drop spot has more heals than any other. Now the Hive has 2 main towers in the middle, and by boxing here, they have visibility here onto 3 teams surrounding them. Mr. Savage to the northeast, Muzz to the northwest, and Goofy to the west. With 3 different teams to surge trade with, Swizzy and Mustache's incredible aim, and more heals than anyone else in the lobby, they deal over 1500 damage before the 4th zone, meaning they don't have to worry about Storm Surge for the rest of the match. With this dealt with, a new problem arises. Where do they get their metal? The Hive is a great drop spot, however, it has almost no metal, and since Queasy, Swizzy and Mustache are a very height-dominant team, they need metal. By playing the highest layer above everyone else in the moving zones, they use less materials rotating than the teams below, they have the best visibility to hit shots, and they don't have the risk of teams fighting them from every angle. So all they need to do is look down. It's not surprising that over 90% of tournament matches are won for the team on height, but in order to do this playstyle, you need max metal or you're just going to get chopped out from below. So how do Queasy, Swizzy and Mustache deal with this? With the northwest 4th zone pool, it only makes sense to go to resistance base. This is in the corner of the map in the dead side of the zone, away from other players where they can safely farm. But the question is, how do they safely rotate there since they have to rotate past all of the teams they were previously trading with? Well, one important distinction about LAN events is that anonymous mode is forcibly turned off. Most players know roughly where other players around them are dropping, so when Queasy spots a fight northwest of them, and then he sees in the elimination feed that Sphinx is knocked, they know that those teams are fighting and are distracted, so they have a free rotate. They fizz crash pad and fly straight through the middle of the 2 teams, easily getting into resistance space where they can harvest their metal for the rest of their match. Whilst harvesting, Queasy builds a small brick base on top of the POI, which seems like a strange choice since it's only the 4th zone. This is very early, however they're simply just playing the odds here. They put themselves in a good position in an early zone, build up, and if they pull the zones, they already have height. If not, well then it's not a waste, since they're already been doing this whilst refarming materials. And in this game, they do get lucky and pull the 5th and 6th zones, so they're already set up in the best position in the lobby because of their good planning. As we've already seen from Swizzy's first FNCS win in Asia 4 years ago, being on height with an assault rifle in hand is where Swizzy is at his best. With insane ARM, he's able to eliminate Poyo out of the sky for his first elimination of the tournament. Up until this point, they had some pretty good zone pools which allowed them to stay on height. But that luck would change with a completely max distance 8th zone which pulled across water. Since Striker's team was already over there, they rotate early, but height had already been claimed and there was no real way of taking it back without taking a massive risk, which forces Swizzy's team to play lower layers. But unfortunately, more bad luck would strike as Mustache's floor is triple pickaxed in the moving zones, and as he falls, the game automatically mantles him, and he can't place a 4 to protect himself. At the exact same time, Tayson, Chicho and Haris pre-edit him from the other side and he is knocked. Swizzy acts fast and grabs the body to throw it back into the safety of his tower, but at that exact moment, Striker sprays the tops out from height and Moustache's knocked body is thrown outside and on top of the tarp. He's then blocked because Swizzy, of course, has to protect the floor to protect himself. Despite losing Moustache early, Swizzy and Queasy were able to clutch up a top 4, putting them 6th place on the leaderboard. But they were just getting warmed up, and in game number 2, they would show the world why everyone was predicting them to win. The 7th zone pulls to the southwest of the 6th, so this forces all of the teams into the east side of this zone and leaves the dead side completely free. With the next zone pulling south towards the dead side, Swizzy's team can crash pad early and build up and take height. So why don't they? Well, if they rotate here first, the amount of materials they'll have to use to build up will be a lot, which puts a lot of teams off from claiming height early. But the terrain here is actually what makes this tough. Since so many teams are rotating off this hill and most of them will be crash padding, if Queasy, Swizzy and Moustache rotate here too early, they'll have so many teams crash padding onto their heads and all those materials they used earlier will be wasted. Instead, they open an edit and look forwards and shoot players in the back who are rotating early. Not only does this weaken them, but it makes them lose confidence in being able to take height. Then, once a few teams have already rotated, they crash pad in late and build over everyone else, claiming height. So because the zone pulls into the dead side where no teams had already established height, and most teams have already rotating off of hills, their choice of a late rotation into a height claim here worked a charm since they were one of the last teams to rotate. Now taking height is one thing, but with 15 other teams who could at any time look up and chop you out, how do they manage to hold it for the entire of the rest of the game? In this meta, there's one thing that's incredibly important to look out for, and that's players using Flowberry Fizz. The animation of this is visible through builds, and teams using this are almost definitely going to hit a crash pad. Moustache spots Fordoxy's team fizzing in the backside of the zone and comms this to his teammates, who are now all aware that they're about to get landed on. To counter this, all 3 players are not carrying a Sentinel Pump, but instead, they're all carrying Wrecker Revolvers. When Fordoxy's team hits the crash pad and flies into the sky in an attempt to retake height, Swizzy and Moustache already have their crosshairs aimed right at them, and Fordoxy is wiped out of the sky. Now, because they're at the backside of the zone, this is a problem. This zone is still pretty wide, so it's a long way to get to the other side, but if Queasy just tarps all the way across, his builds will be weak, so he'll easily get chopped out by teams down below and they could lose height. So instead, he crash pads to the front side of the zone and then builds back up. And Swizzy and Moustache can then single layer across to him and just connect. This crash pad not only stops them from getting chopped out while tarping across, but it also now means that their outhold is now connected in 2 different places, making it significantly harder to get chopped out going forward. From then on, they show great height holding fundamentals by sticking entirely to the right side of the zone, which gives them the best right hand peaks to spray players down below. With everyone else in the lobby running out of materials, this is where they start to rack up a lot of elimination points. With height locked in and the final moving zone approaching, this is where Swizzy and Moustache drop down. Swizzy drops first, staying right at the storm line to fight players at the back of the zone to ensure he doesn't get snuck up on. It's a risky play, but he's able to get 3 eliminations, including his ex-teammate Vanya, before he gets knocked. With the final moving zone pulling uphill and Queasy still on height, the teams below get suffocated and are wiped out by the storm. With their first victory royale in the bag, they now overtake Canada and are firmly in first place. Now, one thing I didn't mention about the Hive is the OXR rank gained from looting this area. You see, there are 2 bunkers that spawn on the map in the mid-game, and these have insanely broken loot for tournaments. They have 1 guaranteed exotic item, the best item in the loot pool, a ton of extra chests where you can get extra heals, tons of shield barrels, but also the entire bunker is made up of harvestable metal, which, as we know, Swizzy's team desperately needs for their game plan. However, in order to open the bunkers, you need to be OXR rank A. Now, you start at rank C, but in order to get to rank A, you need 1700 points. You get 650 by eliminating the queen, but you also get points for destroying hive stashes, bug spawners, and eliminating bugs. On the flip side, each elimination is only worth 75 points, so if you don't land at a drop spot that has bug spawns and a queen, it's close to impossible to get the rank required to open either of the bunkers. Now, there are 4 potential spawns for these bunkers, with 2 of them being chosen at random every game. But the version of the game that was played at the Global Championship is a bit of a strange one. Queens that spawn at the Hive and in Ranger's Ruin have a 100% spawn rate, but Demon's Debris Queen has a 50% chance of spawning there and a 50% chance of spawning at Dystopia City. This means that every game, there's only really 3 teams who can get OXR rank A and then actually open the bunker. So after trading Surge off spawn in game number 3, Queasy, Swizzy and Murstache rotate into the storm towards the bunker to the west. Here, they find the exotic Slapberry Fizz, which is a Flowberry Fizz with 300 uses. But most importantly, it also heals them for white health, not just shield, which for a team playing Storm is very important. They harvest their metal here and then rotate east to the zone. However, once they arrive here, they find that the other bunker is completely unopened. It seems odd that they were able to claim 2 bunkers, but Ranger's Ruin was contested by Ferdoxy's team versus Tayson's team, and after Fred wins this off spawn, he crash pads into FKS's team in the mid game and they die. Acord's team, who gets the queen from Demon's Debris, ends up fighting in the storm, which basically means Queasy, Swizzy and Murstache are the only trio in the entire lobby who's actually able to open any of these bunkers. So they get both of the exotic items. On top of the Fizz from the first bunker, they get the Eradicator OXR rifle from the second one, which is by far the most powerful weapon in the game. It deals 35 damage per shot, but after every successful shot, it increases the damage by 5 up to a maximum of 55 damage per bullet. After 10 seconds, this damage is then reset down to 35, and then this cycle repeats. Thing is, it's not just shooting players alone that will increase the damage. If you shoot NPCs or any player-built structure, this also will increase the damage. So anytime someone using this sprays at another player, it's pretty much guaranteed to have a 55 damage per shot, because if they miss, they'll still increase the damage by shooting builds instead. So, as you can imagine, in the hands of a player like Swizzy, who has some of the best assault rifle aim in the game, this thing is dangerous. The 8th zone in this game pulls exactly the same as it did in the previous game, which pulls into the dead side. However, this time, Queasy, Swizzy and Murstache play this completely differently. In game 2, they waited to rotate late to build over everyone's head, but in this game, they instantly fizz crash pad as soon as the 8th zone reveals itself. So why go early this time if in the previous game they went late? Well, in game 2, if you remember, teams are rotating off of that massive hill and could easily crash pad on their head. However, in game 3, this zone was relatively flat, so by crash padding into the front side early, they're able to freely claim height because they're not worried about another team landing on their head. The rest of this game plays out very similar to the previous. They look back for the fizz animation and this time get 2 elims onto School and Arc. Queasy then crashes to the front side and then builds up. They stay high enough in order not to get crashed on, but obviously teams below will try to make aggressive plays in order to retake height from you. And in this game, Vanya successfully steals height by desperately fizz crash padding up and building on top of their tarp. They've lost height. What do? Do they crank and build fight? Do they spray? Do they just give up height altogether and play lower layers? Well, remember the exotic Slapberry Fizz from the bunker earlier? They jump back into the storm and survive using this Flowberry Fizz and some Chug Splashes. And then since Vanya has built on top of their tarp, they just edit it out and chop him out, claiming height back for themselves. The final zone then comes down to a 3v3 fight where nobody has any materials. Queasy and Murstache drop down to aim duel the opponents, whereas Swizzy drops down at the front on top of a hill, creating a full pinch onto the team down below, wiping them out. With their second win in a row, they are now on 298 points, which is 122 points ahead of second place. Now with this solid game plan working, why change it? In game 4, they get the bunker, the 8th zone pulls into the dead side, they crash pad early, and take height yet again. However, the location of this zone is key because it's on top of Foxy Floodgate. As the first moving zone pulls off of here and down below, many teams are forced to drop and get clustered and stuck underneath the rest of the lobby. Then, when the next zone pulls back up over this, so many teams have to crash pad back up, use a ton of materials, or just die. But for Queasy, Swizzy and Murstache, who took height earlier, this is the easiest zone they could possibly get. Unsurprisingly, from this position, they won a third game in a row and are now on almost double the points of second place. If you didn't understand their strategy yet, in Game 5, in the 8th zone, they're on height again. Now if you've noticed, they're really the only team doing this, and there's not really anyone else contesting their height. Sure, they make it really difficult for other teams to retake it from them, but if it's such a powerful strategy, why aren't more teams going for height in this tournament? Well, if you look at most FNCS winners from their regional majors, you'll see that the winners are nearly always very height-dominant teams. However, since the level of competition at an international LAN is much higher, a lot of the height teams from the smaller regions won't make it to endgame that often or with many materials. That means that there's only a handful of teams who will actually trend to playing height, and most of them are from the major regions. Across the entire event, there are really only a few teams who are playing for height. From Brazil, you had Striker's Trio, who played it in Game 1. From NA, you had Pete's Trio, Poyo's Trio, and then Canada's Trio. And then in EU, you have Swizzy's Trio, Vanya's Trio, Fortnite's Trio, and then Veno's Trio. Now, a lot of the teams were just doing very poorly across the whole event or died off spawn, so they're not in any position to take height at all. And other teams have the same strat. So Vanya's team, as an example, likes to take it early in the same way that Swizzy's team does, but Swizzy's team has been doing this every single game, forcing Vanya's team to play the lower layers. However, the one team who really plays height completely differently is Vico, Veno, and Flixie. Rather than going for height early in the 8th zone, usually they play low to mid-ground layers and then layer up in the 11th or 12th zones and go for a retake. Now, up until Game 5, they've had a pretty poor tournament so far, dying off spawn, so they haven't been in any position to go for height yet. But in Game 5, Veno had a much more successful mid-game strategy where they're able to get a few refreshes, and they're pretty stacked going into the moving zones. Since Swizzy and Murstache drop down to frag out in the final moving zone, Veno scouts height and spots them as they fall. So knowing that Queasy is a solo up on height, he crash pads up and wins the height fight. Prior to this, everybody was talking about how Queasy could potentially break his own record of winning 6 out of 12 games in an FNCS Grand Finals. He did this with Veno, so it was only right that Veno was the one to shut this down. Despite not winning the game, Quizzy, Swizzy and Murstache still placed second place, which increased their lead even more. The final game on day 1 was going exactly as you would imagine, but Swizzy's team decided to key King's Trio, who are rebooting in the Storm, as this is some pretty free elimination points. However, they weren't the only trio with this idea, as Fortnite third parties and gets elimination for themselves. Now they're able to get the reboot onto Queasy, but Murstache is lost in the storm. Despite being a duo, they still managed to take height in the 8th zone as always, but unfortunately they were sprayed out by Fortnite, who then took height for themselves. This match from Fred, Chino and Pablo was incredibly impressive as they dropped a 19 elimination victory royale, but what went under the radar was Queasy and Swizzy still being able to clutch up a top 5 as a duo by playing low ground. With 6 games over at the end of day 1, they had a total of 521 points and a 185 point lead ahead of Vanya's team in second. But the thing with a 2-day event is that there's 24 hours where players can watch the VODs and analyze your strategies and come up with counter strats. Since Queasy had such a massive lead, he was worried about being contested by one of the teams who wasn't doing well, like Peterbot's team. But coming into game number 7, most of the drop spots stayed exactly the same and they were completely fine. However, other teams had certainly seen the success that Queasy has had on height and are now looking to replicate that. Yet again, the 8th zone pulls to the dead side, but at this moment, Swizzy is busy fighting another team to get their loot refresh. Since they're now not first to rotate, Canada's team does the exact same strategy and crash pads early, claiming it for themselves. Potentially, they studied Queasy's winning strategy from the day before. However, they failed to pay attention to the teams using Flowberry Fizz, and Queasy, Swizzy and Murstache are able to crash pad straight onto their head and take height for themselves. Canada drops and edits them out, but they build back up for a second time. The first game of day 2 is looking like a total repeat of day 1. Until they are landed on. Acorn, Poyo and Agers intentionally spent some time in this storm using chug splashes so that when they use a Fizz crash pad, they can just land directly on height from the backside of storm, and they'll never be able to predict it. At the same time, Malibuca's trio sprays out height from the front, and now all 3 teams are cranking and fighting for height. Swizzy and Queasy are wiped out, leaving Murstache alone as a solo. He's able to clutch up a top 7, but this is by far their worst game of the tournament. The next game, they have some tough mid-game rotates. When the 8th zone appears, it's max distance for them, so the height retake isn't possible. The first team to arrive here is Vanya, Swizzy's old duo, who's currently in second place. As I mentioned earlier, they have the exact same strat to early height claim, and due to the tough rotations, Queasy, Swizzy and Murstache have no opportunities to take it from them. So they are forced to play low ground, and in order to sustain the amount of materials to play here, they have to frag out. But unfortunately, they get 0 eliminations and die in 6th. But it would only get worse for them, as in game 9, they take a gamble and push into the dead side of the 6th zone. There's a hill here, and if the 7th zone pulls here, they've claimed height even earlier. Unfortunately, the 7th zone pulls completely max distance away from them, so they're forced to rotate into a bad spot late. The 8th zone, the zone that they nearly always build up for height in, is then also max distance. They decide to take a late crash pad, but this is a bad mistake as other teams are also crash padding at the exact same time, and Queasy is shot in the back and is knocked. Seeing this fight, the rest of the lobby then focuses on them, and Swizzy is also eliminated. Murstache is then left as a solo again, but he's only able to clutch up a top 13 with 0 eliminations. The tables have turned, and things are starting to go horribly. This was only a 15-point game, by far their worst. In the first 3 games of day 2, they've only managed to rack up 100 points, and their 185-point lead is very quickly turned into an 81-point lead. Worst of all, Vanya, Marius and Pixie are quickly catching them up, as they're basically getting a top 5 every single game. Vanya's strategy basically hasn't changed from day 1 to day 2, but the mistakes from Queasy, Swizzy and Murstache are starting to add up. And things are only getting worse. Due to bad luck, both bunkers spawned on the east of the map, one south of Dystopia and the other one to the east of OXR HQ. With the zone also pulling to the northeast, there really isn't a good path for Swizzy's team to go for either bunker. So they're forced to harvest their metal in Swarmy Stash instead. On the flip side, Acorn, Poyo and Agers get the 50% queen spawn at their drop spot. They then rotate over to the first bunker in the south, and then all the way up to the northeast bunker. From their looting path, they have the mythic OXR rifle from the Queen at Demon's Debris. Now they also have the exotic version from the second bunker. Remember, the damage of the exotic starts at 35 and then increases to 55 when shooting structures, so when they spot Queasy peeking through his cone, he gets absolutely deleted in a microsecond by a triple spray through fully built metal. This is not even a bad play by Queasy, it's just literally uncounterable. Poyo's team then drops down on them and Swizzy is able to put out some nice counter damage, but he's simply outnumbered. Now for a third game on the day, Murstache is left as a solo. He does manage to get an elimination, but runs out of materials and is pumped in the back by a player in the storm. Worst of all, Swizzy's ex-teammate is up on height. Rewind is zone, and as Poyo's team jumps onto Queasy, Vanya scouts and sees that height is free. As Poyo's team is distracted, they fizz crash pad onto height, and since this is their drop spot, they have capped materials, and with the best height team in the lobby now eliminated, this is just a completely free height hold. The game comes down to a heal off, and Vanya is able to go back into his old box and finds a ton of heals. This should be a guaranteed win, but for once, Swizzy gets lucky. Queasy, Swizzy and Murstache are now only 28 points ahead of Vanya, Marius and Pixie with only 2 games left. On day 2, their games have only been getting worse and worse as the day progresses, and at this rate, the consistency of Vanya's team looks absolutely unstoppable. They need to make a play. They scrap their entire game plan. No bunker, no height in the 8th zone. Instead, a counter strat. In between games 9 and 10, there's a short break so that players can rest, but Queasy, Swizzy and Murstache did not rest. With the leaderboard getting close, Queasy studied Vanya's rotations and found a flaw in their game plan. He saw that in game 9, when the zone pulled south, Vanya's team fizz launchpads from inside OXR HQ and flies way up into the sky to rotate through the storm. So, with the zone pulling south in game 11, Queasy drops the medallion that they get from the Hive's Queen so that they're not visible on the map, and fizz crash pads all the way south around the hill near OXR HQ. This ensures that they won't be spotted by either Kanada's team or by Vanya. They time it perfectly so that just as they arrive on the hill, Vanya's team hits the pad and flies 220 meters into the sky. Swizzy, Queasy and Murstache all have intentionally taken OXR rifles as these are the best weapons to use at range and successfully knock Vanya out of the sky. This game is no longer about the Victory Royale. If Swizzy is able to wipe out the entire trio, this will increase their lead going into the final game and make it much more difficult for Vanya to win. Knowing this fight will play out in the storm, Queasy, Swizzy and Murstache have intentionally taken more white heals to outlast them, so they'll win this fight if they just play time. In the 2022 FNCS Invitational, Queasy and Veno made a play to land on Kamin City in the final game. This tournament was decided at a gas station, but Queasy died. This 3v3 to decide the tournament is again at a gas station. And again, Queasy gets knocked. Now in a 2v3, Swizzy is pumped down to 70 HP and Murstache down to 4, but he manages to out-damage Vanya and gets the first knock. He's about to die as Marius trails in behind him, but in an act of aggression and despite being low HP, Swizzy re-peeks and shoots him in the back, knocking him out. With a sliver of health left, Moustache pops a Chug Splash and is able to survive. All of a sudden, it's a 2v1. With 2 Swift Revolver shots, Swizzy wipes out Pixie. With Vanya's team down, they are now locked on 606 points, but with the elimination points that Swizzy's team have just gained, they're now up to 646, 40 ahead. They still have the rest of this game to play out and one after that, but this fight has scuffed up their loot and rotations a lot, but any additional points they can muster up from the rest of the match will further their lead even more. Since this fight has taken so long, they're late to rotate into the 7th zone. Queasy throws a crash pad down, but Moustache is knocked down out of the sky, and Swizzy gets split. Since he's being lobby focused, he rotates down a hill and is able to use the last few builds he has to create some space. Despite only having a few wood builds to place, Queasy doesn't play scared and he loops into the backside of the storm and picks up a knock onto Rapid. But worst case scenario, the zone pulls over the hill, and Queasy can't just leave Swizzy behind. He's got no mats to build up for him, so Queasy just throws a crash pad down and the two are reunited. This is the point in the match where placement points really start to kick in, and every single second distances them further from Vanya's team. They manage to survive past one more team, granting them a few more placement points before getting W-keyed. This 3v3 counter-strat play that they made has turned their 28-point lead into a 50-point lead with a single match left. At this point, everyone's thinking the same thing. Does Vanya's team land on Swizzy's team? If they wipe them out of the game early, they can win the global championship. With utter confidence in their game plans, both teams changed nothing. Vanya's team plays the storm and hits the high launch pad, and Swizzy's team went for the bunker. Come to the endgame, both teams were still alive, and Queasy, Swizzy and Moustache played the storm with slurps and splashes and then chopped out Malibuca's team on height from the back. But in a last-ditch effort, seeing that height has been chopped out and that it's Swizzy's team who gets the eliminations, Vanya needs to make a big play in order to win the tournament. He crash pads up onto height with the minigun and manages to knock Swizzy. Moustache and Queasy fall too. He drops for the loot, but is hit weak and dies in the storm. Pixie and Maris are able to get a top 6, but it's not nearly enough. From losing his $100,000 and being disqualified from the FNCS to winning the global championship, this is how Fortnite's unluckiest player became a world champion.